There are 3 ways I could start this video. One way is with a bird. This bird, Sturnus vulgaris, the European starling. The second way is with a prison. This prison, Robben Island Maximum Security Prison off the coast of Cape Town, South Africa. The third way, and the way that is objectively best for the YouTube algorithm, would be to talk about another YouTube channel, PragerU, a Christian nationalist propaganda campaign created and leveraged to aid the rise of a uniquely American form of fascism whose only use value lies in debunking its many falsehoods and turning its ugly content into goofy shitposts.
I'm Penis Prager, and this is the Far Side Chat. I just hit myself. What is the point of life?
The common thread among all these things is the topic of this video. William Shakespeare.
Hi, are you William Shakespeare?
Guilty as charged.
My name is Kyle Calgren, and for a decade and a half, I've been a video essayist. I've been a video essayist since before there were video essayists, back when we all still called ourselves internet reviewers. Yeah, I know I'm looking off to the side a lot. It's where my script is. I'm sorry. There's a lot of text to get through. I came up in a generation of video makers who never cited sources and only made jokes because we've always been more carny than academic. Back before we all had to set up isolated net communities to prevent the post-Gamergate wolfpacks from rendering our fragile psyches with harassment campaigns. And I, the Pete Best of BreadTube, have been flailing before an audience of close friends, concerned relatives, and contemptible hate watchers who dox my home address while calling me homophobic slurs and claiming that I hate myself because I'm white. I'm doing great, thanks for asking. And also, I talked a lot about Shakespeare. I've talked about the hammy, ego-enabling repertory group that is the cinema of Kenneth Branagh. I've talked about the frenetic acid trip that is Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet. I've talked about everything from Jean-Luc Godard's brilliantly layered shitpost that is his King Lear, to a cheaply made 90s adult film entitled A Midsummer Night's Cream. Although the latter probably had a bigger budget than the Godard movie, to be perfectly honest. I haven't talked about Shakespeare in a while, not since I crashed out discussing Romeo and Juliet. I've done plenty of Shakespeare since then. I started doing Shakespeare over Zoom for charity during the pandemic with my online theater company, Worlds Elsewhere, and you can see me over on my friend Sarah's YouTube channel attempting some of the Shakespeare clown roles. You can see my Dockberry, and you can see me bottom. You can see me playing bottom. And there's been plenty of Shakespeare movies to talk about since then. There's the visually stunning Joel Coen Macbeth, with the legendary Denzel Washington as the Thane. There's the clever comedy Rosalind, where Caitlin Dever plays the lover that Romeo jilts in favor of Juliet before the play even starts. There's the charming documentary Grand Theft Hamlet, about the staging of the tragedy of the Dane on the streets of Los Santos in GTA Online. And there's the drama All Is True, where Kenneth Branagh took his final pretentious form and cast himself as Shakespeare. And those are just the ones I've seen. I could have talked about all of these and more, but I didn't. I talked about Shakespeare so much I was at risk of becoming a channel that could only talk about Shakespeare. I don't think all my videos on Shakespeare hold up well, sometimes for reasons out of my control. For example, I somehow managed to talk about Shakespeare in Love without once mentioning the fact that its Oscar sweep was the result of it being produced by Harvey holy shit we gave this school so much damn power Weinstein. All of those videos have aged poorly, and in such unique ways. Like, I made this criticism of Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet. The Montagues and Capulets are construction magnates or something, and their petty squabbles produce this? Hey, remember that time that Donald Trump's chauffeurs got into a knife fight with Warren Buffett's secretaries? Man, those Trump boys sure could bite a thumb. Remember when the idea of Donald Trump raising a violent mob of his supporters was a funny absurdity? And as longtime viewers know, one of my longest-running jokes was an editing gag where I would point out how William Shakespeare, the untouchable emblem of highbrow culture, is quoted by everyone.
Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with a remover to remove.
Everyone.
My dearest Angelica, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day.
Everyone.
Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. Stark said you wouldn't get that because it's not a Star Wars reference.
I was trying to make a point that Shakespeare is not high or low culture, that his works occupy a space in pop culture that is accessible to everyone. His works are the basis, the background noise of pop culture. Even when his words aren't directly quoted, his storytelling is everywhere. The climax of his Henry V has King Henry rally his soldiers before a battle against overwhelming odds by invoking the significance of the holiday they fight on.
Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
A key scene in Hamlet has the prince stage a play recreating the murder of the previous king in front of the current king, the man who murdered him, in a bid to catch his conscience.
Wait, is this fucking play about us?
And the finale of Titus Andronicus shows Titus' revenge, where he feeds his enemy a meal made of their own relatives.
Oh my god! I made you eat your parents.
From the ivory towers to the media illiterate shitposters, Shakespeare is, was, and always will be mass culture. And the work is accessible to everyone. Everyone.
You have not experienced Shakespeare until you have read him in the original Klingon.
And yes, unfortunately, everyone.
Truth is not a left-wing value. So for the left to start all of a sudden speaking about truth is like illiterates talking to you about Shakespeare.
Oh, Prager University. Good old PU. PragerU, long-running internet punchline, was founded in 2009 by its namesake, radio talk show host and YTP content farm Dennis Prager, and co-founded by Alan Estrin, a screenwriter whose credits include, and this is not a joke, Pocahontas 2: Journey to a New World, which is a direct-to-video Disney sequel about the latter part of a life of a child who was abducted by genocidal groomers who told her lies that her father didn't want her and refused to pay her ransom to free her, despite the deep depression that Chief Powhatan Wahun Sanakak sank into. Then, while she was held captive, was forcibly impregnated, then forced to wear English clothing to hide the pregnancy. They killed her husband Kocoum while she was stored on a boat to England, accompanied by a dozen other Powhatan, half of whom were sold into servitude or put on display as curiosities while she was paraded around before the English crown to sell tobacco, impregnated again by John Rolfe, who abandoned the child on returning to Virginia, and put on a ship back home where she died of an unexplained illness, no more than 21 years old. Matapanai oral history states that she was poisoned to prevent her return home, and warned her tribe of the English cult to take their land. The story of Pocahontas is one whose tragedy is only compounded by the fact that it has been romanticized to fit a colonialist narrative.
She seems so sweet, she means us well.
Like 20 feet! How can you tell?
We'll rue this day, you wait and see.
What is to be or not to be?
Shakespeare had been dead for 2 months before Pocahontas was taken to Plymouth, but that's probably the least heinous historical inaccuracy in Pocahontas 2: Journey to a New World. PragerU is not a university, gives no degrees, and has no academic credibility, or at least it didn't until 2023 when Florida became the first state to recognize PragerU as an official education vendor, in the words of a press release that they themselves put out. New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Montana, Texas, South Carolina, Idaho, Arizona, and Louisiana all followed suit. And while I was working on this video, they also started working with the Department of Education to make educational content, therefore, going federal.
I have often thought that true power lies not in the sword, but in the mind guided by principle.
In PragerU's 2024 annual report, they called themselves the antidote to what it called the poison of things like the ABCs of Activism, the Sesame Street special about police brutality, and Nicole Hannah-Jones' 1619 Project, all of which grapple with America's history of institutional racism. To PragerU, these things are poison.
But as you eat the roasted goose, your little sport insists.
Hey, Dad, did you know America is racist?
Your mind goes numb, your skin turns pale, and your heart aches with fear. Your child is being filled with lies.
Dennis Prager really does not want anyone to think that America is racist. He also wants people to think that there is something called the left that wants to destroy something called Western civilization. And this is its surest sign.
The English department at the University of Pennsylvania replaced the portrait of the greatest English language writer who ever lived, William Shakespeare, with a picture of a black lesbian poet. Why? Because he was a white European male. Leftist professors have replaced the pursuit of excellence with the pursuit of diversity.
Wow, that is a great theory Prager has about a replacement. I think everyone who knows a bit about PragerU knows this video. It's the same one where Dennis Prager says urine and feces.
Urine and feces. Yes, urine and feces.
A classic. PragerU is best known for this series of talking head videos where various right-wing characters monologue over a dead blue screen and hastily assembled source-free graphics with titles like, "Who Killed the Liberal Arts?" with the answer always being the left whomst is bad.
Here's a tragedy in its way, on the level of King Lear or Hamlet.
We'll come back to this video. PragerU is a key player in the American right-wing political ecosystem that gave rise to MAGA and the corresponding eradication of anything alien to it. Every single contributor to PragerU is laser-focused on ensuring that Americans remain the cruelest, most ignorant, bootlicking bullies on planet Earth. So what does it mean that the works of William Shakespeare are taught at Prager University?
Welcome to the book club. I'm Michael Knowles, and today we will be discussing the greatest play ever written, Hamlet, by good old Billy Shakespeare. To help us discuss that, we're joined by Andrew Klavan. Drew, thanks for coming on.
Great to see you. Billy Big Boy, they call him.
Billy Big Boy.
Billy Big.
This video about Hamlet by Billy Big Boy is hosted by Michael Knowles, failed actor and YouTuber, which is a redundant statement. Michael Knowles' acting credits include a role in the joyless hate crime Lady Ballers, and his publishing credits include the self-published book Reasons to Vote for Democrats. Its 256 blank pages showcase Knowles' talent for research and prose excellently. Knowles has hosted multiple PragerU videos, as well as this book club series, where he sits down with other PragerU contributors to talk about various books and how they can be applied to a conservative worldview. For Hamlet, he sat down with Andrew Klavan, a writer of thriller novels, one of which was turned into a movie directed by and starring Clint Eastwood. He is also in Lady Ballers.
That's the biggest dick I've ever seen on a lady.
These two adult human men, who are both in Lady Ballers, spend 22 minutes discussing the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark.
It's not only the greatest play ever written, it is a pinnacle of the human imagination. I mean, Newton's laws, the founding of America, Plato, Aristotle, Hamlet. You know, these are things that you look at and think like, wow, that's what the human being can do.
Andrew Klavan wants you to know that Hamlet is good. Here's the reason why he thinks it's good.
And the reason it's the great play is it's written at the moment when the modern world appears.
Klavan isn't wrong. Shakespeare was writing at the start of the modern era. But Klavan has an interesting idea of what the modern world means.
And Shakespeare anticipates every single philosophical and emotional problem that is going to grow up out of what is the great division that causes modernity, which is the Reformation.
Klavan's reading of Hamlet is theological. The theology of Hamlet is definitely fertile ground for interpretation. Klavan talks about how Hamlet is a student at Wittenberg, one of the major centers of Protestant thought, and he is faced with the ghost of his father, who appears to be in purgatory, an idea explicitly rejected by Protestantism.
One of the big problems that Martin Luther and the Protestants had with the Catholic Church was the idea of purgatory. And they said, this is not in the Bible, this is simply a creation of the human imagination. And if there's no purgatory, then there can't be any ghosts. And Puritans were absolutely certain about this, in spite of the fact that people saw ghosts. So nobody thought there was no such thing as ghosts. The question is what they are. And of course, in spite of the fact that there's a ghost in the Bible, when the Witch of Endor brings back the ghost of Samuel to talk.
Klavan just said that ghosts must be real because there's a ghost in the Bible. I'm going to let the comment section fight that one out. Klavan's primary point is that Hamlet represents the birth of the modern world. This is his idea of the modern world.
And the things that he says in his madness, that we're not sure is madness or not, are things that are being said today all the time. When you think about the postmodernists, when you think about the idea that language doesn't convey meaning, and you say to Hamlet, what are you reading? And in his madness he says, I'm reading words. They have no meaning, anymore.
I'm fighting every instinct I have not to make this video just an hour of me making the world's biggest jerk-off motion.
When you think about relativism, the idea that there's nothing that is good or bad, but thinking makes it so, that line comes from Hamlet. Shakespeare knows that once the moral certainty of Catholicism has shattered, there is no way anymore to decide what the moral universe is made of. It's all relative.
Okay, yes, but more importantly, no. Sure, Shakespeare was Christian and wrote for a hegemonically Christian audience. One couldn't be openly anti-religion, what with Elizabeth and James after her being supreme governor of the Church of England. But it's myopic to suggest that the play is about the end of moral certainty created by the Protestant Reformation and the end of the centrality of the Catholic Church, especially when the monarchy was Protestant. They can, and did, imprison playwrights for sedition and heresy. But that tension between Catholic and Protestant was real. The audience of Hamlet definitely knew that tension, had lived through that tension, and probably would have found that tension dramatically interesting. The original audience might have shared Hamlet's uncertainty and empathized with him. The interpretation by Klavan and Knowles is born from very recent conservative politics. The enemy is always the people asking questions and creating moral uncertainty.
And then there's this amazing speech that he makes when he's pretending to be mad, where he says, I'm sad, I've lost all my mirth, and the entire world has changed. Now I look at the sky is supposed to be beautiful, and the sky is no longer beautiful. I look at the earth, which is such an amazing thing, and I look at even mankind, and he has lost his beauty for me.
Knowles and Clavin are talking about the "what a piece of work is man" speech.
I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth.
And it's a great speech. It's one of my favorite passages too. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory. I have dealt with depression my entire life, literally my entire life. I've had people who knew me back when I couldn't have been more than 6 tell me they remembered me saying things about feeling tired all the time, not really enjoying anything, maybe my toys, but nothing else. No more than 6. Depression has been a constant and impervious force in my life. And Shakespeare, writing Hamlet, captured what that feels like in this speech. Depression means consciously understanding that there is good in the world, that there's beauty in the world, but being unable to feel it. Hamlet, in his depression, knows that the earth is a goodly frame, but seems only a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air, look you. This brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire, why it appears no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. I know the sky is blue and the stars shine, but I cannot feel that they are beautiful. And just as Hamlet knows the heavens are beautiful but cannot feel their beauty, he knows humanity is beautiful but cannot feel its beauty. What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form, in moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? No, man delights not me, nor woman neither. To know man is beautiful, to know woman is beautiful, to know people are beautiful, and not be able to feel it. Shakespeare is writing with great empathy about what it means to feel an overwhelming sadness. I cannot fathom how broken my soul would have to be to hear that speech and think, and that is why trans people deserve to be eradicated from public life. The way Michael Knowles does.
For the good of society, and especially for the good of the poor people who have fallen prey to this confusion, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely. The whole preposterous ideology at every level.
Reducing a demographic of people to a belief system and calling for their, quote, eradication, unquote. I don't want to ignore the fact that Michael Knowles is a genocidal bastard. And yes, this is relevant. Transphobia is a key part of Knowles and Clavin's reading of Hamlet.
The issues that we deal with today in politics, can a man become a woman? Can a woman do things that a man can do? Is a person a real thing, or can you change who you are?
Clavin and Knowles teach Hamlet as a lesson in what goes wrong when traditional morals are abandoned. For them, the existence of trans people and the fact that women are human beings are signs that morality is being made meaningless.
All of that is contained in the play, and all those questions are in the play, because once that connection between being and seeming, between internal world and external world, once that breaks down, even in imagination, everything is broken down and you have no place to put your feet. And that is why the big division in human life, and certainly in Western life, is Jesus saying, I am the truth, and Pilate saying, what is truth?
What is truth?
The PragerU reading of Hamlet is that Hamlet needs Jesus.
And that's the state we find ourselves in today. What is reality, and how much of what reality is within us? And you have theories now where people say, well, everything we think is a fiction. Human rights, it's a fiction. Money, it's a fiction. And people like me say, no, it's not a fiction. It's a description of something that exists within the human soul. And Hamlet no longer knows whether things exist within his soul or whether he's completely living in a delusion. And that's the modern world.
Again, the theme of the left is destroying everything by questioning everything. No surprise, it's a deeply conservative reading of Hamlet where the problem is modernity.
To me, what is this quintessence of dust? One aspect of this, I think the greatest speech in the entire play, is that it can be read as a rewriting of Psalm 8. It was actually your son who pointed this out.
Psalm 8, verses 3 and 4. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, human beings that you care for them? So, The connection between the psalm and Hamlet's speech is tenuous at best, and it suggests that Shakespeare was working entirely within a holistic religious system without question or subversion. But of course, as Clavin and Knowles recognize, even Christianity wasn't a holistic system at the time. Sectarian wars between Protestant and Catholic raged constantly, and theater wasn't considered something Christian, particularly by the Puritans. The Puritans, England's homegrown sect of religious fanatics who felt the creation of the Church of England didn't go far enough, hated theater as a concept. They even banned it altogether once they gained enough political power. There were Puritan tirades against the institution of the theater published before, during, and after Shakespeare's lifetime, with titles like The School of Abuse, containing a pleasant invective against poets, pipers, players, jesters, etc. Plays confuted in fie actions, prowing that they are whence to be fuffered in a Christian commonweal, by way of both the cavils of Thomas Lodge and the play of plays, written in their defence, and other objections of players' friends are truly set down and directly onward. A second and third blast of retreat from plays and theatres, by the one whereof was sounded by a reverend bishop dead long since, the other by a worshipful and zealous gentleman now alive, one showing the filthiness of plays in times past, the other the abomination of theatres in time present, both expressly prowing that commonweal is nigh unto the curse of God, wherein either players be made of or theatres maintained. Spiritus Certificarius Christi in Terra, a treatise, wherein dicing, dancing, vain plays are interludes with other idle pastimes, etc., commonly used on the Sabbath day, are reproud by the authority of the Word of God and ancient writers. Made dialogue-wise by Jan Wordsworth, minister and preacher of the Word of God. Even the titles are exhausting. This was all because the English theatre at the time was widely popular among all classes, and therefore was considered by Puritans to be a satanic anti-church force. Shakespeare was not writing religious sermons, he was writing popular entertainment. His plays have murder and sexual assault and torture and references to extramarital sex and oral sex and anal sex and sex work, even urine and feces.
Yes, urine and feces.
Shakespeare was not cozy with the church, and any good critique of his work should acknowledge the tension he existed in as popular entertainment in an increasingly theocratic society. You can see it in Kenneth Branagh's All Is True. Branagh, as Shakespeare, has this exchange with his son-in-law John Hall, who, historically, was a committed Puritan.
A joy to see you, Dixer. At last given up on your plays to distract the mob from our Lord.
Does the lark song distract you from your God, John?
Of course not. It is evidence of God.
Ah, well then, perhaps for some, I was the lark.
Shakespeare's relationship with Christianity is, like all things, complicated. Morally uncertain, even. But for Knowles and Clavin, Shakespeare's faith is very, very certain.
Hamlet has been thrown back to the moment when Jesus stands before Pilate, and Jesus says, I am the truth, I speak the truth, and all who love the truth listen to my voice. And Pilate says, what is truth?
How they jump from Hamlet to the Gospel of John is fascinating. Fitting with their thesis that Hamlet is about the madness that comes when the moral center is gone, they turn Hamlet into Pontius Pilate, looking Jesus in the eye and saying to Jesus, who has declared himself to be the truth, well, what is truth?
And suddenly, in the Catholic world, in the world of Christendom, we believe, oh, Jesus is the truth. But once you remove that certainty, you're right back with Pontius Pilate saying, what is truth? And that's the question of the play. What is truth? How do I know what reality is?
Comparing Hamlet to Pontius Pilate is something that most people would call a stretch. However, there are direct allusions to the Bible in Shakespeare, but they aren't exactly reverent ones. Take this passage from 1 Corinthians 2:9. St. Paul writes of the glory of the kingdom of God, "But as it is written, the things which eye hath not seen, neither ear hath heard, neither came into man's heart, are, which God hath prepared for him that love him." In A Midsummer Night's Dream, the character Bottom the Weaver wakes up from a night of sleeping with the Queen of the Fairies while being a donkey from the neck up, and says,
The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to taste, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report what my dream was.
It's a joke. It's a joke about a guy trying to quote scripture and getting it wrong. So Shakespeare definitely knew the Bible, and with a joke like this, he definitely knew the Bible well enough to mess with it. In Stephen Greenblatt's 2004 Pulitzer Prize-nominated Will in the World, How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare, he writes of this joke, "This is the joke of a decisively secular dramatist. A writer who deftly turned the dream of the sacred into popular entertainment. The joke reaches out a long way, to the solemnities of the pulpit, to the plays that the professional playing companies took to the provinces when Shakespeare was a boy, to the amateur actors who performed the cruder versions of these plays, and perhaps to the young, awkward Shakespeare himself, filled with visions his tongue could not conceive, and eager to play all the parts." I bring up Stephen Greenblatt for a reason here. Greenblatt is a critic whose work since the 1980s has been to take Shakespeare, and all works of art, away from ideas of universal truths, and back to the distinct sociopolitical context in which they were created, a movement called New Historicism. You know how there's a certain kind of cultural critic who complains constantly about how modern media is enmeshed with current politics and beholden to modern trends which make them bad, while older media is made up of classics that have stood the test of time because they speak to universal human truths? The New Historicists simply said, what if those classics were also enmeshed with then-current politics and beholden to then-current trends, and we've simply ignored and forgotten what those politics and trends were? That's New Historicism. Reconsidering all works of art as unique products of their time and place, inviting us to study the uniqueness of the times and places in which they were made. Greenblatt's approach was, and still is, controversial precisely because it goes against the reverence for Shakespeare, because it goes against the prevailing attitude that Shakespeare was not subject to historical forces, but spoke to something eternal in the human soul. New Historicism didn't treat Shakespeare like a religious text. It didn't treat him like secular scripture. It didn't treat him the same way that Knowles and Clavin treat him.
If you don't know Hamlet, if you haven't been introduced to Hamlet, in some sense, you don't know yourself. If you don't know the King James Bible and Hamlet and some of Shakespeare, you really don't know where we come from and who we are.
You heard the man. Read Shakespeare and the Bible, nothing else.
Well, it's like the Ten Commandments saying, be true to thine own self, and to thine own self.
Be true. Yeah, number 7.
You see, there's always been a huge disconnect between the people who are most likely to praise Shakespeare and the people who are most likely to recite Shakespeare. The people praising him are, like the PragerU posse, conservative killjoys who will sit in reverence of any poet as long as they're several centuries dead, while the people who recite Shakespeare are emotionally unstable polyamorous disaster bisexuals, or as they are more commonly known, actors. That disconnect causes one of the biggest problems with Knowles and Clavin's reading, not treating Hamlet as what it is, a play.
What's fascinating about it is Hamlet is very frustrated that he can't decide to carry out this revenge. And the things that make him most frustrated are times when people are pretending something is important, but it's not.
A recurring theme of their reading is how morality is untethered because everything in the play is performative. Really think about that word in this context. Performative.
This is one of Shakespeare's big obsessions, the division between being and seeming. What you seem and what you really are.
There are certain people in the world who work entirely within the division between being and seeming. It's called acting.
What you seem and what you really are, and he works it out even further in the question of race in Othello.
Oh, put a pin in that. Put a massive, pointy pin in that.
Of what happens after death, right? This is why To Be or Not to Be, the famous speech where he says the fear of something after death and conscience makes cowards of us all, that we're operating now in this field of absolute unknowing. And when you have absolute unknowing, when you have no thesis, let alone faith, but you have no theory of what is real, you're completely lost.
They're onto something, sure, but I disagree with their conclusion. Hamlet is definitely about the artificiality of the world and the complicated nature of performance and performativity, sure. But perhaps it's because Hamlet is itself a performance of a play, and one that centers on a performance of a play in the play itself. Right after Hamlet's "What a piece of work is man" speech, his friends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern introduce him to a troupe of traveling players who perform a scene from Greek mythology for him. Hecuba, Queen of Troy, mourning the death of King Priam.
But encountering the actors, and then he has the actors put on a play, and he says, the play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. He's going to have the actors enact the murder of his father.
As he reaches the conclusion that the play's the thing, Hamlet has a long monologue about the depths of his feelings and how the actors around him seem to express their feelings more genuinely than him, a person with a lot of genuine feelings that require action.
Is it not monstrous that this player here,
but in a fiction, in a dream of passion,
could force his soul so to his own conceit that from her working all his visage wand,
tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his
whole function suiting with forms to his conceit, and all for nothing, for Hecuba.
What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her?
What would he do had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have?
This question of seeming and being, of performance and reality, is, I think, the central question of the play.
Of course, when Hamlet says this, he's saying it while also being a role played by an actor on a stage. He's commenting on his own status as a fictional character who is being performed just as he's about to stage a play within a play, performing for performers to undercover a murderer who is themselves performing. It is not a didactic statement about the lack of moral center, it's meta-theater. Shakespeare didn't come up with meta-theater. Hamlet itself was part of an already popular genre of theater called a revenge tragedy, and arguably the first true Elizabethan revenge tragedy, Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, ends with a play within a play where the targets of protagonist Hieronymo's revenge are stabbed with real daggers. Which are, of course, fake daggers stabbing actors who will not really die but will instead get up and bow at the end. But written the way it is, it must have been thrilling as an audience already familiar with the tropes and practices of the staged tragedy. The audience knew that they were watching a performance, and playwrights knew how to bend expectations of that performance.
And you see so much of the performance there, even in the to be or not to be monologue, which is actually is probably the most famous of the play. Yeah. That isn't a performance. He doesn't put that on to trick people. I mean, he's saying that to himself. He's working out to himself whether it is better to be alive or to be dead.
Right.
Why you don't kill yourself because you're afraid of something after death.
But Hamlet is nonetheless performing. Not only for us, he gives that speech while being watched by Polonius and Claudius. There is dramatic tension here. There are layers of performativity. Layers which they ignore to push the thesis that modernity corrupts. You can see the same troublesome conclusion reached in Noel's book club video on King Lear, which I won't spend as much time on.
We will delve into King Lear with my guest, Douglas Murray, the international best-selling author of The Madness of Crowds, of Strange Death of Europe.
The full titles of those books are The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race, and Identity, which is about why caring about the oppression of the LGBT community, racial minorities, and women is bad, and The Strange Death of Europe, Immigration, Identity, and Islam, which is about how Muslim immigrants are destroying European identity by existing, therefore making him another genocidal bastard.
These are books, Douglas, that paint, I'm sorry to say, a bleak political picture. And I felt the only book that paints a bleaker political picture would be King Lear by William Shakespeare. So thank you very much for coming on.
It's a great pleasure. It's true. King Lear makes my work look like comedy.
Their discussion on Lear explores similar territory to the Hamlet discussion, with Lear being taught as the story of a kingdom where morality is topsy-turvy and fools are wiser than kings, and good people are shunned while bad people thrive.
The fool is one of the only characters, becomes the only character who can tell the truth to the king.
Yeah.
His truths are not that funny, but are incredibly accurate.
They never really get into how Lear is unfit to lead, and his vain demands for flattery, his unreasonable demands that Goneril hosts his army, his vicious curses against her when those demands aren't met, Lear's constant abuses of power, leads to the undoing of the entire kingdom. It's just yet another reading where the enemy is disruption of moral certainty. Another hierarchical interpretation. However, Lear, like Hamlet, can also be seen as meta-theatrical. The play begins with a political performance. Lear demands that his daughters perform for him, declare their love for him, and shuns the daughter who fails to flatter him. That is, fails to perform correctly for him. In the play's final lines, Albany says, "Speak what we feel, not what we ought to say." Again, a play about performance, about performativity, which is being performed. Forgive me for the broiest analogy I'll ever write, but William Shakespeare wrote plays in the same way that Christopher Nolan directs movies. Nolan movies are constantly playing with time and memory, and the fluidity and malleability of both. Time and memory are also essential to movies as a medium. Captured time, replayable memory, these are the things that movies are made of. Just like how Shakespeare plays are done by performing, by playing, by pretending to be a character while being an actor. These are performances about the nature of performance.
Truth is not a left-wing value. So for the left to start all of a sudden speaking about truth is like illiterates talking to you about Shakespeare.
Prager says that the left talking about truth is like an illiterate talking about Shakespeare, but hey, hot take, this might be controversial, but one can be illiterate and understand Shakespeare. One can be unable to read a single letter of the alphabet and understand Shakespeare. You do not need to be able to read to understand Shakespeare, because Shakespeare wrote plays. Plays are performed live by actors who speak the words for an audience. Hot take. You think everyone in Shakespeare's audience was able to read? In A Midsummer Night's Dream, Theseus says that he will hear a play.
I will hear that play.
Just as the audience is hearing it. The Elizabethan audience came to hear poetry, not read it. Hear some poetry at the Globe, then waste the rest of the night in South London, guzzling small beer, giving sex workers a payday, and watching tortured dogs fight a bear to the death. It was called bear baiting, and it was just as, if not more popular than Shakespeare plays at their peak. These plays were done in the disreputable part of town in theaters, and theater was, and very much still is, a disreputable institution. Ask me, a former theater kid, a term which still has negative connotations.
You know why he's so good too, and he doesn't get enough credit for it, is he's an actor.
Uh-huh.
Shakespeare was an actor. This guy knew everything about the stage. Through and through, he knew everything about actors, he knew everything about performance. He even gives acting advice in Hamlet.
It's telling that for neither of Noel's videos on Shakespeare, he didn't ask actors to comment. He asked writers, which is odd. Noel's trained as an actor at the Stella Adler Studio of Acting. He must know actors, he must have worked with actors, but he chose to speak with writers. Of course, Noel's is an American, and America has a unique relationship with Shakespeare. Because America was a series of settler colonies founded by capitalists, and more relevantly, Puritans who hated theater as a concept, most early Americans treated Shakespeare not as theater, but as literature. Many still do. They treat Shakespeare not as theater to be staged and watched and be thrilled by in public spaces, but as something to be studied and interpreted, and to be used to reach moral conclusions in private spaces. Someone whose work shouldn't be taught in a university theater department, but an English department.
Here's a tragedy in its way on the level of King Lear or Hamlet.
This is one of PragerU's classic talking head in dull blue space videos. Shakespeare's face, vandalized, is in the thumbnail, and it is entitled, "Who Killed the Liberal Arts?"
To get a bachelor's degree in English literature at the University of California at Los Angeles, one of the most prestigious colleges in America, you must take courses in gender, race, ethnicity, disability, or sexuality studies, in imperial, transnational, or post-colonial studies, and in critical theory. But you are not required to take a single course in Shakespeare.
The host of this video is Heather MacDonald, political commentator, fellow of the conservative think tank the Manhattan Institute for Policy Research, and the author of books including The War on Cops, How the New Attack on Law and Order Makes Everyone Less Safe, The Diversity Delusion, how race and gender pandering corrupt the university and undermine our culture, and when race trumps merit, how the pursuit of equity sacrifices excellence, destroys beauty, and threatens lives. This is the person PragerU asked to host a video about why English departments should require courses on Shakespeare.
In other words, the UCLA English faculty is now officially indifferent as to whether an English major has ever read a word of the greatest writer of the English language, but is determined to expose students, according to the course catalog, to alternative rubrics of gender, sexuality, race, and class.
This video was following the lead of a 2007 report by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, or ACTA, entitled The Vanishing Shakespeare. ACTA's stated mission is to support liberal arts education, uphold high academic standards, safeguard the free exchange of ideas on campus, and ensure that the next generation receives an intellectually rich, high-quality college education at an affordable price. In practice, this means praising universities that shutter DEI programs, surveying campuses to expose levels of self-censorship and lack of viewpoint diversity, and giving out the Philip Merrill Award to people who've made an extraordinary contribution to the advancement of liberal arts education, core curricula, and the teaching of Western civilization and American history. The American Council of Trustees and Alumni was also one of 80 organizations on the advisory board of Project 2025. Because of course they were. But most importantly, ACTA acts as a watchdog for universities who fail to meet their standards for academic integrity. The Vanishing Shakespeare is an example. The report surveyed 70 top universities and colleges and found that only 15 of them required a course in the literature of William Shakespeare in order to graduate with a degree in English. The report complained of the advance of the not-so-great, as it reduced all 70 universities to the Boolean value of a bold sentence where either Shakespeare is required or Shakespeare is not required. The author of the report writes,
"As this report makes clear, English majors across the country can graduate today without reading Shakespeare in depth. Employers, especially newspapers, publishers, schools, and others who hire English majors, should be deeply concerned. So should parents, alumni, trustees, and interested citizens. If reading Shakespeare is not central to a liberal education, what is? But for English majors to miss out is far worse. As we said before, a degree in English without Shakespeare is like an MD without a course in anatomy. It is tantamount to fraud."
Okay, surely an English major should be able to recognize hyperbole and deconstruct a bad analogy. Shakespeare is to English is not as anatomy is to medicine. The anatomy of English is its grammar, its vocabulary, the ways that words are arranged to communicate through it. If English is medicine, William Shakespeare is not anatomy. William Shakespeare is a patient. Just as Geoffrey Chaucer before him was a patient. Just as Jane Austen after him was a patient. Just as I am a patient. And if you can understand the words that I'm saying, that is, if you speak English, you are also a patient. ACTA is wrong. If they taught medicine the way they want to teach English, every doctor would only know how to treat one patient.
That movement seeks to infuse the humanities curriculum with the characteristic academic traits of our time. Narcissism.
PragerU videos keep coming back to the idea of narcissism. It's one of Dennis Prager's favorite insults.
There's no question that modern psychotherapy and psychology is profoundly narcissistic.
He thinks narcissism is something that everyone is born as and must be trained to overcome.
Take babies.
Famously, Dennis Prager considers babies to be narcissists.
They're entirely self-centered, as they have to be in order to survive. I want mommy, I want milk, I want to be held, I want to be comforted. That's not goodness. That's narcissism.
Dennis Prager thinks it's narcissistic to feel lonely and hungry. Do not trust a PragerU video that uses the word narcissism.
Lost in this political posturing is the only true justification for the humanities. To provide knowledge. Knowledge leading one hopes to the most important acquisition of all, wisdom.
Here, she implies that wisdom cannot be found by studying gender, race, disability, sexuality, empire, or the theory of criticism.
The American founders drew on an astonishingly wide range of historical and philosophical sources,
implying that the works floating behind the founders' heads have nothing to do with gender, race, disability, sexuality, empire, or the theory of criticism,
to craft the most stable and free republic in world history. Ignorance of those sources, which led to the West rule of law and its unparalleled prosperity, puts these unique and monumental achievements at risk.
Here she argues that great works of art like the ones made by Shakespeare led to the West's rule of law and unparalleled prosperity. Aye, there's the rub. They tell us we must venerate Shakespeare because Shakespeare is of the West.
It is simply better to escape one's narrow, self-centered mind and to live inside the prose of George Eliot, the music of Bach, or the art of Van Dyck than never to have done so.
Again, accusations of narcissism. It is not narcissistic to have courses in gender, race, disability, sexuality, imperialism, or the theory of criticism. These are things that everyone knows. Aspects of humanity that everyone moves through. Everyone including Eliot, Bach, and Van Dyck. Everyone including Shakespeare. Narcissism, named for the character in Ovid's Metamorphoses, who's cursed to fall in love with his own reflection and waste away in a love unrequited, is the love of oneself to the point of ignorance of all else. It is the opposite of narcissism to ask people to question the subjective experience of art. It is asking Narcissus to realize that he is looking at his own reflection and splash the water a little bit. What PragerU does with its accusations of narcissism is put critics on the back foot by suggesting that close individual readings that contextualize the self, that is, you, the reader, in relationship to the artwork, are morally wrong. In simpler terms, Prager is saying, fuck you. Yes, fuck you specifically.
Ultimately, it is the loving duty we owe those writers, artists, and thinkers whose works made our world possible. The academic narcissist, oblivious to beauty and nobility, knows none of this. That's bad enough, but to deny such glorious knowledge and wisdom to students, that's a tragedy on a Shakespearean scale.
What a sentence to write. Deny, what a verb to use. But Shakespeare isn't being denied. Access to courses on Shakespeare is not denied. All that bluster about the importance of the deep connection the Founding Fathers had to Western civilization and how important it is to read Eliot, hear Bach, see Van Dyck, and it all springs from this obvious lie that Shakespeare is denied to students. But Shakespeare is not denied to students at UCLA. A brief glimpse at UCLA's 2024-25 course catalog shows 8 courses being offered in Shakespeare at the undergraduate and graduate levels, in the theater departments and the English department, with variations and focus on early plays, later plays, and special topics all being offered to students. For the non-English majors out there, the word offered is the opposite of the word denied.
The academic narcissist, oblivious to beauty and nobility, knows none of this.
As if beauty and nobility could only be found in a certain subset of art, made by a certain subset of people. People to whom we owe a loving duty, whose works made our world possible, while spurning those who might question the world made by these works. But no, it is a loving duty that we owe to Shakespeare, and the other 3 European white people she named. The exact same line in this animation of a portrait of Shakespeare being tossed aside and replaced with some filthy, undeserving non-Shakespeare. There's a pattern that needs to be called out whenever Prager types cry censorship. They're clearly fine with calling for the, quote, eradication, unquote, of anything containing queerness or non-whiteness, but when they do cry censorship, the thing supposedly being censored isn't being censored, it's only being decentralized. ACTA and the PragerU video citing it aren't complaining that Shakespeare isn't being taught, they're complaining that Shakespeare isn't required to be taught. PragerU's take on Shakespeare is not new. It is extremely orthodox. For them, Shakespeare is the immortal bard, a singular fountain of insight into the human experience who stands unequaled in the history of English as a written language, to the point where the idea of Shakespeare is synonymous with the idea of good art. This isn't a new idea, of course. The reason that Shakespeare is quoted by everyone,
to be I've seen it.
Or not to be.
Shakespeare, right?
Everyone.
To be or not to be.
The verbal equivalent of da-da-da-da.
That is the question.
I'll take to be for 50, Alex.
Everyone.
To be or not.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
To be or?
To be or not to be.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
To be or not to be.
Might I have a word? I hope you don't mind, but just a minute. To be or not to be, that is the question.
Is because quoting him creates an intertextual link that begs comparison. It's asking the audience to reconsider this text in the context of a universally recognized shorthand for good writing.
To play the bards, to make a human. We've made the works of Shakespeare secular scripture.
And yes, I've been guilty of this. I've ended videos with long speeches about how important Shakespeare is because of how influential he is. I hadn't done the hard work of undoing the lazy platitudes that have been drilled into me since birth about the cult of the bard. Or, as it's known, bardolatry. Bardolatry has a long history. From David Garrick's bicentennial celebration where he gave him the name the Bard of all Bards, through Samuel Johnson, whose critical annotations on Shakespeare led him to be the most cited author in Samuel Johnson's other most famous work, the First English Dictionary, through Thomas Carlyle, whose great man theory of history placed Shakespeare in the same canon as Napoleon, Cromwell, Martin Luther, the prophet Muhammad, and the Norse god Odin. The most influential bardolater of the 21st century might be the late Sterling Professor of Humanities at Yale University, Harold Bloom, whose 1998 work of literary criticism, Shakespeare, the Invention of the Human, argued for the veneration of Shakespeare as the creator of the modern world. He begins it, the answer to the question, why Shakespeare, must be, who else is there? Well, lots of other people. Some would say billions. Bloom wrote The Invention of the Human after the rise of New Historicism, and in response to it. Throughout his career, he blasted the New Historicists, along with other schools of criticism including Marxists, feminists, African-American studies, and post-structuralists like Lacan, Derrida, and Foucault, for supposedly denigrating aesthetic value for a political agenda, acting as, in his words, a school of resentment. Dennis Prager agrees.
Leftist professors have replaced the pursuit of excellence with the pursuit of diversity.
For the bardolater, Shakespeare simply is excellent, and to say otherwise is merely resent. Even the Shakespeare fandom has toxic fans. And it should be noted that the writer who coined the term bardolatry didn't do so out of resentment, but out of disdain. George Bernard Shaw was being an absolutely genuine hater when he wrote the long and deeply researched preface to 3 Plays for Puritans. His points of contention lay in the way Shakespeare had been staged with cut scenes and changed lines.
It is a significant fact that the mutilators of Shakespeare, who never could be persuaded that Shakespeare knew his business better than they, have ever been the most fanatical of his worshippers.
In modern terms, Shaw was complaining that canon Shakespeare had been overtaken by fanon Shakespeare.
It was the age of gross ignorance and incapacity for his work to produce the indiscriminate eulogies for which we are familiar. It was the revival of genuine criticism of those works that coincided with the movement of forgiving genuine instead of spurious and silly representations of his place. So much for bardolatry.
And like Shaw, we should be deeply critical of people who would use Shakespeare's name to reshape society, while simultaneously reshaping Shakespeare. Shaw isn't a perfect writer either. He had plenty of horrible views. Still, he was right to question the cult of the bard, and right to question how far veneration of Shakespeare had outgrown the works themselves, to the point of existing not as works of poetry and prose, but as tools of cultural policing and signifiers of class. Fitting, then, that George Bernard Shaw's most famous characters are a working-class English girl and the supercilious imperialist who mercilessly manipulates her into a narrow idea of what an English speaker should be.
Woman who utters such disgusting and depressing noises has no right to be anywhere, no right to live. Your native language is the language of Shakespeare and Milton and the Bible. Don't sit there crooning like a bilious pigeon.
The proper response to this kind of attitude is, of course, the bardolatrous answer to everything is singular and repetitious. He's just that good. The cry called out over centuries, he's just that good. And yeah, he's good. We should keep questioning just how good. The anti-Bardolaters have a point. We should be critical of Shakespeare, as we should be critical of all writers. Otherwise we just make ourselves eternal children expected to fawn over authors, rather than actually understand them.
Hi, are you William Shakespeare?
Guilty as charged.
What's your secret, Mr. Shakespeare? How come your work doesn't age?
Which brings us to PragerU's kid-focused content. This is Leo and Layla, a series of attempted animations where two personality-free children use a time machine to meet historical figures. In this episode, they grumble about having to attend a Shakespeare festival, and thus use their time machine app to travel back to meet the man himself, William Shakespeare, stuck to one spot, and always facing the same direction.
What light through yonder time portal breaks?
Shakespeare is totally chill about meeting time travelers, because, you know, he's done it before.
You mean travel on through time and space? You what? You're from another world, and Martha is from the future. It's not hard to work out.
That's incredible. You are incredible.
Leo and Layla throw some basic questions at him, and he responds in that cartoonish fashion that he's usually written in, as constantly swooning of the concept of art and beauty.
Oh, how I do love playing with the English language.
He responds to their questions with some very banal answers to why he's considered a great writer.
I like to choose my words carefully and order them strategically to amplify humor, suspense, beauty, etc., etc.
After Effects Shakespeare is describing what most people would call writing.
And I also love introducing new phrases or groups of words that cleverly describe a situation. Like, the world is your oyster. How about vanish into thin air? What about to fight fire with fire?
This claim is common. The claim that Shakespeare is the origin of so many household words is common. Even the phrase household words gets attributed to him.
Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words.
I've made a running gag out of how many times his phrases show up in popular culture. But the solid truth is that most of the time, Shakespeare is just the earliest citation most people have for these phrases. The first time these words or phrases were used probably happened in everyday conversation before being written down with other phrases into the verses. Most language is spoken, not written. Assuming this is untrue feeds into the idea that Shakespeare's genius was singular and detached from the world that he lived in. I'm going to focus on this because venerating Shakespeare as the origin for certain phrases is a key part of PragerU's lesson plan. And yes, there is a lesson plan. This video was designed to be watched in a class, and PragerU helpfully provides a lesson plan, which starts as follows. The PragerU worksheet, lesson plan 45 minutes, warm-up 10 minutes. Begin by explaining to the class that you will read several phrases aloud. Instruct students to raise their hands if they have ever heard them before. The world is your oyster. Vanish into thin air. Fight fire with fire. Love is blind. Going on a wild goose chase. All that glitters is not gold. Break the ice. Ask the students if they know where the phrases originated. Explain that all the above phrases, and many more, can be attributed to a famous poet and playwright named William Shakespeare. You know, I'm starting to realize why there are so many videos on YouTube debunking PragerU videos. Because debunking them is so damn easy. Let's go through the list.
The world is your oyster.
Huh?
It means you have the opportunity and ability to achieve anything.
Never heard that one.
The world is your oyster does indeed come from Shakespeare. The Merry Wives of Windsor, Act 2, Scene 2, opens on Falstaff and his swaggering yet cowardly crony Pistol in the middle of having an argument.
I will not lend thee a penny. Why then the world's mine oyster, which I with sword will open.
Pistol has asked Falstaff for money, and when Falstaff refuses, he blusters, and basically says he can get money wherever he wants. The usual usage of the phrase is that one has the opportunity to achieve anything. Put it back in the original context, and it's a pathetic guy violently posturing, threatening to cut the world open, and shuck it like an oyster. Next phrase.
How about vanish into thin air?
Oh yeah, all the time.
From The Tempest, Act 4, Scene 1. There's just been a song and dance performed by spirits conjured by Prospero's magic. Prospero disperses them and says,
Our revels now are ended. These our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air.
Melted into thin air. Not vanish, melted. Clearly the phrase into thin air caught on, while melted didn't. The phrase changed over time. Attributing the full phrase to Shakespeare is only partially accurate.
What about to fight fire with fire?
You made that up?
I did.
No, he didn't. Shakespeare did not ever write fight fire with fire, though he came close in King John. Nobody's favorite play, King John. In Act 5, Scene 1, John is surrounded by enemies, and his illegitimate nephew Philip tells him,
"Let not the world see fear and sad distrust govern the motion of a kingly eye. Be stirring as the time, be fire with fire, threaten the threatener, outface the brow of bragging horror."
Be fire with fire, you might have noticed, is different from fight fire with fire. Again, the structure of the modern phrase is there, but the wording is different in the original. The phrase, like everything else in the world, changed over the intervening 400 years. The worksheet for Leo and Layla's meeting with Shakespeare lists more phrases. Next is, love is blind.
You know what they say, love is blind.
In The Merchant of Venice, Act 2, Scene 6, Jessica starts to dress as a man for plot reasons and says this.
I'm glad 'tis night you do not look on me, for I am much ashamed of my exchange. But love is blind, and lovers cannot see the pretty follies that themselves commit. For if they could, Cupid himself would blush to see me thus transformed into a boy.
So yes, Shakespeare wrote love is blind, but it's in the context of a woman feeling embarrassed adopting a gender expression that makes her uncomfortable. Moreover, Shakespeare didn't come up with the idea of love being blind. Listen to this line from A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind. And
therefore is winged Cupid painted blind.
Shakespeare is alluding to the artistic practice of painting Cupid wearing a blindfold, which had been a motif in Italian Renaissance art for over a century when Shakespeare wrote Merchant of Venice and A Midsummer Night's Dream in the mid-1590s. Shakespeare did not create the concept of love being blind. He definitely used that idea and commented on it, but it's an oversimplification to call it a Shakespearean phrase. Next phrase. Going on a wild goose chase. A common phrase meaning to go on a futile errand. You've all heard it.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Shakespeare used the phrase wild goose chase, shows up in Romeo and Juliet, but Shakespeare did not come up with the phrase wild goose chase. It was originally a horse riding phrase. A wild goose chase was a kind of race where riders would follow the erratic movements of a lead horse, like a pack of wild geese. You can even hear the jockeying origin in context when Shakespeare references the wild goose chase in Romeo and Juliet. The lines don't appear in pretty much any film version. Baz Luhrmann cut them. So did Zeffirelli. So did the BBC Shakespeare adaptations, which are supposedly complete adaptations. But it makes sense that they're cut so often because they barely make sense in context. Romeo has just come back from his night under the balcony. Mercutio is annoyed that he abandoned the gang. They have some innuendo-laden banter, and Mercutio gets a little tired, saying, "Come between us, good Benvolio, my wits faint. Switch and spurs, or I'll cry a match." Romeo says switch and spurs, which are the things that a rider uses to make their horse go faster. Mercutio is fading, and Romeo is pushing him to say more. And that leads into Mercutio's line, "Nay, if thy wits run the wild goose chase, I have done, for thou hast more of the wild goose in one of thy wits, I'm sure, than I have in my whole 5. In context here, the wild goose chase takes place in their minds. It means to drive yourself a bit crazy trying to make sense of something. The idea of going on a wild goose chase existed before Shakespeare used it, and even when Shakespeare used it, it's not in the same context it's used now. The phrase existed before Shakespeare and after Shakespeare, and when Shakespeare used it, it was unique to the scene he was writing. Language is constantly evolving, has evolved, and will evolve. Trying to attach a definitive authorship onto certain phrases would require combing through centuries of writing, most of which have been lost, to properly attribute its first usage. And that would just be like trying to pursue something that's really difficult to pursue, like a feral, like something that's really hard to catch, like something that goes really fast. You know, all that glitters is not gold. Common phrase, plenty of variations, classic cliche recognizable even when inverted. But like Wild Goose Chase, the phrase, "all that glitters is not gold," existed before Shakespeare used it. In The Merchant of Venice, Portia has multiple suitors, and her father's will sets up a game where the suitors must correctly choose the right casket in order to win her hand. One of the suitors chooses the gold casket, which is empty except for a note. He reads aloud from the note.
"All that glisters is not gold. Often have you heard that told."
Often have you heard that told. Shakespeare himself, in the text, says that "all that glitters is not gold" is a common saying. And a survey of English literature pre-Shakespeare confirms it. A phrase similar to this can be seen in Chaucer, the Canon's Yeoman's Tale. "But all thing which that shineth as the gold is not gold, as that I have heard it told." It was a common saying even when Chaucer wrote it. It goes back to a Latin proverb, "Non omne quod nitet aurum est." The level of bardolatry it takes to claim that Shakespeare came up with "all that glitters is not gold" is absurd. We are this close to saying that he came up with the individual meanings for the words to, be, or, and not. And finally, the last phrase on PragerU's list is break the ice, meaning to introduce conversation, getting to know someone.
Allow me to break the ice.
But it has a much more specific meaning when Shakespeare used it in The Taming of the Shrew. Tranio tells Petruchio,
"If it be so, sir, that you are the man, must stead us all, and me amongst the rest. And if you break the ice and do this feat, achieve the elder and set the younger free for our access."
Here, break the ice means to accomplish a complicated task. In this case, marrying Catherine, thus persuading her father to allow her sister Bianca to marry. Catherine is the ice in this case. Again, a different meaning than it's used today. And it has an earlier citation than Shakespeare. In 1579, Sir Thomas North published his translation of the 2nd century Greek writer Plutarch's Parallel Lives, a series of dual biographies comparing and contrasting Greek with Roman historical figures. And in the biography of the 4th century BC Theban statesman Pelopidas, North used this phrase: "Now the Confederates appointed a day certain to break the ice of their pretended enterprise." North's translation, again, was published in 1579. The earliest known performance of The Taming of the Shrew was in 1594, and we know that Shakespeare read North's translation of Plutarch, because North was clearly used as inspiration for Shakespeare's Roman plays, Julius Caesar, Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus. Here's a passage from North's translation of Plutarch's biography of Coriolanus. His mother, Volumnia, has come to convince him to abandon his mutiny against Rome, and she says, "If we held our peace, my son, and determined not to speak, the state of our poor bodies and present sight of our raiment would easily bewray to thee what life we have led at home, since thy exile and abode abroad."
Should we be silent and not speak? Our raiment and state of bodies would betray what life we have led since thy exile.
But think now with thyself, how much more unfortunately than all the women living we are come hither.
Think with thyself. How more unfortunate than all living women are we come hither?
For if I cannot persuade thee, rather to do good unto both parties than to overthrow and destroy the one.
If I cannot persuade thee, rather to show a noble grace to both parts than seek the end to one.
Thou shalt no sooner march forward to assault thy country.
Thou shalt no sooner march to assault thy country.
But thy foot shall tread upon thy mother's womb.
Than to tread on thy mother's womb.
That brought thee first into this world.
That brought thee to this world.
So does this make Shakespeare unoriginal? A plagiarist? No. Any more than it makes Lin-Manuel Miranda a plagiarist for quoting Washington's farewell address in Hamilton.
After 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal.
Nor is Miranda a plagiarist for using the same technique of singing along to a speech being spoken at the same time that Will.i.am used in his song Yes We Can. That's a direct allusion. Here's the thing about art. All art is a series of arrows pointing to all the art that influenced it. Because art is made by people, and people speak using words, whose meaning was decided by billions of other people long before they leave someone's mouth, and every word is a reference to another, reinforced by collective understanding of the culture in which we live. Continuing the example, Hamilton quotes the Founding Fathers,
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The Bible,
Everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree.
And yes, Shakespeare.
My dearest Angelica, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day.
But to make full sense of it, you can't ignore the allusions to Will.i.am, or to Mobb Deep.
I'm only 19, but my mind is older.
Only 19, but my mind is older.
Or to Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
Such a blunder. Sometimes it makes me wonder why I even bring the thunder. Why he even brings the thunder.
Or to Biggie Smalls.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
It's the 10 crack commandments.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's the 10 dual commandments.
And all of these references make up the text that is Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton. Shakespeare's works, likewise, are intertextual hyperlinks to Norse translations of Plutarch, and Holinshed's Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland, from which he got the plots for all of his Henry plays, as well as Macbeth and King Lear and parts of Cymbeline, and Matteo Bandello, whose novellas provided plots for Twelfth Night, Much Ado About Nothing, Romeo and Juliet, and even more parts for Cymbeline, and to Ovid, which provided the Pyramus and Thisbe play within a play in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and for Troilus and Cressida, he riffed on Chaucer, who himself riffed on Homer. Understanding Shakespeare means knowing the Latin comedies of Terence and Plautus, which he would have used as frameworks for his own comedies, and knowing the tragedies of Kyd and Marlowe, who established the genre conventions that Shakespeare bent. Knowing Shakespeare means knowing the theatrical culture that he lived in, which produced so many plays whose authors are now lost. Even the plays themselves lost, reduced to only their titles, including a now lost play based on a Scandinavian legend known as Hamlet. But no, for PragerU, the most important connection in Hamlet is to the Bible.
What is this quintessence of dust? It can be read as a rewriting of Psalm 8.
The way PragerU teaches Shakespeare would be like if they taught Hamilton and only pointed out the one reference to Shakespeare, when the reality is the reference to Biggie is far more elaborate and more central to the themes of the piece. The methodologies of PragerU are clear. You must know Shakespeare, the Bible, America. All else is woke nonsense that must be purged from your knowledge. So why am I focusing on PragerU's Shakespeare videos? There are a lot of claims made in PragerU's output that would make anyone with an even basic understanding of world history al dente from how fast their blood boils. From Martin Luther King Jr. saying that one must always protest injustice, but never violently.
Through it all, though, our protests remain peaceful. I believe with all my heart in nonviolence. Two wrongs never make a right, and you can never defeat hate with hate.
To Frederick Douglass saying that yes, slavery is bad, but you shouldn't protest that much.
But no place is perfect, so it's good to listen to activists who want to improve things. But they have to be willing to work inside our system, and they have to understand that change usually requires patience and compromise.
To Christopher Columbus saying, yeah, but slavery's not that bad, you know?
Slavery is as old as time, and has taken place in every corner of the world. Even amongst the people I just left. Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no? I don't see the problem.
These are some hideous damn lies. Leo and Layla meet Martin Luther King in 1968, and he still preaches nonviolence, when in reality, by that time, King had called riots the language of the unheard.
I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the economic plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years.
Prager's Frederick Douglass teaches working inside the system to create change. The real Frederick Douglass was friends with John Brown. John, Harper's Ferry Raid Civil War Dress Rehearsal, Brown. John, we must, as John Brown Jr. has taught us this evening, reach the slaveholder's conscience through his fear of personal danger. We must make him feel that there is death in the air about him, that there is death in the pot before him, that there is death all around him. We must do this in some way. Brown. John, his zeal in the cause of my race was far greater than mine. It was as the burning sun to my taper light. Mine was bounded by time, his stretched away to the boundless shores of eternity. I could live for the slave, but he could die for him. Brown. Frederick Douglass, lifelong John Brown stan. And as for Christopher Columbus? Oh boy.
Being taken as a slave is better than being killed, no?
These islanders of Cuba, being reduced to the same vassalage and misery as the inhabitants of Hispaniola, seeing themselves perish and die without any redress, fled to the mountains for shelter. But other desperadoes put a period to their days with a halter, and the husband, together with his wife and children, hanging himself, put an end to those calamities. By the ferocity of one Spanish tyrant whom I knew, above 200 Indians hanged themselves of their own accord, and a multitude of people perished by this kind of death. Bartolomé de las Casas, A Brief Account of the Destruction of the Indies, 1542, describing the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean committing suicide en masse rather than suffer slavery under Spanish rule. Shut your 5-frame pie hole, you ignorant clutch cargo ass After Effects tutorial! PragerU habitually sells disgusting lies designed to sanitize atrocities committed in the name of Western civilization. So, with videos whitewashing the radicality of the abolitionist movement and the civil rights movement after it, and the inhumanity of the transatlantic slave trade, and the apocalyptic brutality of the genocide of the indigenous peoples in the Americas, a video or two from PragerU saying Shakespeare is great doesn't seem that bad in comparison. And yet, we should question why these people make these claims at the same time. The people who make these videos that support these white supremacist myths also make videos about how Shakespeare is the greatest writer ever. And we need to acknowledge that uncomfortable truth. We need to acknowledge that some of those that quote verses are the same that burn crosses. Disclaimer, I am not saying that PragerU engages in the exact same terrorist practices that the Ku Klux Klan engages in. I am saying that they support white supremacist ideology in a way unique to themselves. Again, these are the same people that waste our time by putting words in the mouths of anti-racist activists saying that you shouldn't protest racism that much. And yet, they also waste our time by making an episode about why Shakespeare should be considered the greatest writer ever. Clearly, Shakespeare is important to the cultural project that PragerU is pushing. If he wasn't, they would have just ignored him. Like literally every other playwright in history. The dead-eyed cartoon children never meet Sophocles, or Aristophanes, or Plautus, or Bassa, or Moliere, or Chikamatsu Montezuma, or Oscar Wilde, or George Bernard Shaw, or Anton Chekhov, or Friedrich Schiller, or Afra Bain, or Henrik Ibsen, or Samuel Beckett, or Eugenie Ionesco, or Agatha Christie, or Bertolt Brecht, or Athol Fugard, or even all-American playwrights like Thornton Wilder, Edward Albee, Eugene O'Neill, Lynn Nottage, August Wilson, Tennessee Williams, David Henry Hwang, Nyla Cruz, Louis Valdez, Susan Lori Parks, Lynn Rids, Wakoki Yomuchi, or Tony Kushner, because of course the PragerU people don't want anyone watching Angels in America.
I hate America, Lewis. I hate this country. Nothing but a bunch of big ideas and stories and people dying. The white cracker who wrote the national anthem knew what he was doing. He set the word free to a note so high nobody could reach it. That was deliberate. Nothing on earth sounds less like freedom to me.
Putting my theater major to work in this video.
I live in America, Lewis. I don't have to love it.
Leo and Layla meet writers, sure. They meet prolific writer of nonfiction, Frederick Douglass, whose work they ignore. They meet C.S. Lewis, who is important to their lessons solely because of his Christianity and how he stood up for his beliefs. They meet Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Not Mark Twain, the real person, but the fictional characters he created, Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. They might as well meet Captain Nemo and Mr. Hyde while helping them fight off Martian tripods. But they also meet characters from the Bible, so okay, maybe they can travel into fiction. Anyway, but oops, correction, after further research I realized I actually do meet a second playwright. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who did indeed write a play once, The Love Girl and the Innocent, which premiered at the Guthrie Theater in Minnesota in 1970. But of course, Solzhenitsyn isn't important to know because he wrote a play, or even because he was a writer. He's important to know because he wrote against communism. Shakespeare is the only artist Leo and Layla meet who's treated like a great artist. The only one whose art is treated as intrinsically great. They repeat this phrase. He is not of an age, but for all time.
Read this. He was not of an age, but for all time. What does that even mean?
I have no idea.
This is quoted in the lesson plan. It's the first question on the official worksheet. They say it to Shakespeare's face.
Is that what the quote on this flyer for your festival means? It says, he was not of an age, but for all time.
What a lovely compliment, yes! It means that my works are as relevant in your time as they are in mine.
And nowhere in the video or the lesson plan do they attribute that sentence to its author, Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson was a playwright who in his time was famous and beloved by theatergoers and fellow playwrights. He was arrested for sedition in 1597 after the premiere of The Isle of Dogs, which he co-wrote with Thomas Nash, satirized Elizabeth I. He bounced back after his legal trouble and wrote satirical comedies of humors like The Alchemist, Volpone or The Fox, Every Man in His Humor, and Bartholomew Fair. William Shakespeare acted in plays Jonson wrote. In 1616, King James I granted him a pension, and because of that, he's been called England's first poet laureate, getting royal backing over 50 years before the position of poet laureate even existed. The poem that PragerU failed to attribute was Johnson's "To the Memory of My Beloved, the Author, William Shakespeare, and What He Hath Left Us." He wrote it in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death, and it prefaced the first folio edition of the complete works of William Shakespeare. What became the cult of bardolatry began as a poet mourning his colleague and friend. Leave thee alone for the comparison of all that insolent Greece or haughty Rome sent forth, or since did from their ashes come. Triumph, my Britain! Thou hast one to show to whom all the scenes of Europe homage owe. He was not of an age, but for all time. Imagine being Ben Jonson, being lauded in your day as one of the best writers in your field, respected by colleagues and audiences alike, only to have your most famous piece of writing be the nice compliment you wrote your dead co-worker. And that's how Ben Jonson is known today, as a footnote in the story of Shakespeare.
Fraud!
Ben Jonson was also the lone voice of reason in Roland Emmerich's Anonymous, which dramatized the Shakespeare authorship question. It was the most offensive piece of pseudo-history Emmerich directed, up until he made a movie about the Stonewall Uprising where he turned Marsha P. Johnson into the wacky comic relief. Anonymous also has a number of early modern playwrights as supporting characters who only exist as a school of resentment to Shakespeare's genius. I'll recycle my old video essay on Anonymous here.
I could do it if I wanted to.
Do what?
A play in Beck pentameter. It's not that hard.
Think you so? Have you ever tried?
Of course not. But I could if I wanted.
Well, it wasn't all in verse.
Ah, you see?
Alright, I need to explain how stupid this scene is. Jay-Z, Snoop Lion, and LaRizza all walk into a bar. Jay-Z says, "Hey, you guys hear about this new kid, Kanye West?" And the other two go, "Yeah, I've heard the name." And then he goes, "Have you heard that he raps rhyming verse to a beat?" And the other two go, "What?" I really compared Kanye West to Shakespeare, didn't I? Roland Emmerich's Anonymous and PragerU make the same assumption. No, Knowles and Clavin don't think Shakespeare was written by someone else.
The people don't believe Shakespeare is Shakespeare.
They
say Shakespeare was a woman, Shakespeare was the Earl of Oxford, Shakespeare is me. I would like that theory. I want credit for Hamlet.
But they do elevate Shakespeare beyond who he was.
To be perfectly honest with you, when I read his plays, and especially when you read his plays all together, I find it hard to believe that any human being could have written them, that any one mind could have contained the world as they did.
The central assumption in both the cult of bardolatry and the anti-Stratfordian conspiracy theory is that Shakespeare as an author is too great a figure to be simply another artist. He must be something called a genius. And it doesn't matter what society he came from, doesn't matter what material realities he lived in, doesn't matter if he collaborated with other creative workers, all that matters is the genius. And we all must sit in grumbling admiration of the great artist. Shakespeare is important to PragerU, as PragerU explains on its lesson plan, because of Shakespeare's contribution to Western civilization. Capital W Western, capital C civilization. The same message taught to children as the one taught to adults.
The great humanist tradition on which much of Western civilization and the Western University has been built. That tradition was founded on an all-consuming desire to engage with the genius of the past.
I wonder if other languages have cults around their authors as big as Shakespeare's. Genuine question for the audience. If your native language is Chinese, do everyday Chinese speakers quote Journey to the West as often as English speakers quote Hamlet? If you speak Russian, have phrases from Tolstoy work their way into everyday language? Or Goethe, if you speak German? If you speak Spanish, to sound educated, are you obliged to quote Cervantes? All of those authors are world famous, and they've all crafted stories beloved globally. And I can't help but wonder why none of them are considered the greatest writer ever, and why the cult of Shakespeare seems to have the best publicity. And the thought that has crept into my mind is it just because Shakespeare wrote in English?
So interestingly, part of Shakespeare's popularity, we cannot deny, is tied to the British Empire. Events far beyond Shakespeare himself, and of course the continued hegemony of the American Empire, or the American country, which keeps the English languages kind of the global lingua franca. If that changes, will it be the Tao Te Ching? Will it be the Ramayana in the 21st century? Will it be some Arabic work that returns to the fore? So Shakespeare is still linked to the violence of empire, though he himself has not been used in quite the same way as
His
the Bible.
humanity transcends that, doesn't it?
Of course.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is if he wrote in Lithuanian,
yeah,
but was exactly as good as he was, he wouldn't be the poet he is today.
Akala, founder of the hip-hop Shakespeare, and every inch of Shakespearean, is right. It's a very basic fact that Shakespeare wrote in English, and the spread of Shakespeare is bound to the spread of English, and the spread of English was anything but peaceful. When I was writing the Shakespeare series of videos, I thought it might be amusing to showcase Shakespeare adaptations from around the world, and Shakespeare is indeed global. From the animations of Jerzy Tunka in what is now the Czech Republic, to the fantastical war epics of Kurosawa in Japan, to the musical melodramas of Vishal Bhardwaj in India, to the world-famous in their own right adaptations that came out of Broadway in America, Shakespeare is global. But consider for a second how he became global. During his lifetime, touring troupes of actors performed plays in mainland Europe. After his death, his plays were popular across the continent, translated into French, German, and yes, into Czech. The 1786 performance of the play Macbeth od Shakespeare, in what is now Wenceslas Square in Prague, set the stage for Jerzy Tunka 2 centuries later. But Shakespeare would not be translated into any Algonquian languages. His plays came to America through English-speaking settler colonies who spread their language through the barrel of a gun. In Asia, Shakespeare wouldn't be translated into Japanese until the Meiji era, until isolationist Japan would be cracked open by American gunboat diplomacy when Matthew Perry sailed to Araga. And in India, Shakespeare came first as entertainment for expatriates, and then through official British policy. The English Education Act of 1835 reallocated funds in Indian higher education from traditional practices towards instruction in English. The English politician Thomas Babington Macaulay, serving on the Viceroy's Executive Council, said words which became infamous.
I have no knowledge of either Sanskrit or Arabic, but I have done what I could to form a correct estimate of their value. I have read translations of the most celebrated Arabic and Sanskrit works. I have conversed both here and at home with men distinguished by their proficiency in the Eastern tongues. I am quite ready to take the Oriental learning at the valuation of the Orientalists themselves. I have never found one among them who could deny that a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. The intrinsic superiority of the Western literature is indeed fully admitted by those members of the committee who support the Oriental plan of education. So that makes it fine that the other racists agree with you. Sure.
Shakespeare in Europe. Shakespeare in America. Shakespeare in Asia. Here's a story about Shakespeare in Africa. During the height of apartheid, the South African government held some of the most ardent activists here, at Robben Island Maximum Security Prison. One of the activists held there was Sunny Venkatrathnam. While there, he successfully smuggled a book, which was passed around from prisoner to prisoner from 1975 to 1978. This item became known as the Robben Island Bible. Though it wasn't a Bible, and despite the outward appearance, it was not a Hindu religious text. Venkatrathnam had smuggled a copy of the complete works of William Shakespeare into prison, which he was able to keep by pasting Diwali greeting cards on the outside and convincing his ignorant guards that it was his Bible. Which, in a way, it was. Venkatrathnam passed it around, and asked his fellow prisoners to sign their name next to their favorite passages. The names listed became a who's who of the anti-apartheid movement. Billy Nair, who would later serve 2 terms in the National Assembly after the first post-apartheid elections in 1994, picked a suitably anti-colonial line from The Tempest. "This island's mine, by Sycorax, my mother, which thou takest from me." Caliban's declaration to Prospero, the exiled duke and sorcerer who conquered the island and enslaved him. Resonant words for a man imprisoned on a colonized island. Govan Mbeki, future deputy president and one of the more militant figures there, chose the pastoral opening lines of Twelfth Night. "If music be the food of love, play on. Give me excess of it." And signed on the 16th of December 1977 were the words of Julius Caesar. "Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. Of all the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to me most strange that men should fear seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come." These words were signed N.R.D. Mandela. There are different ways one can interpret this artifact, the Robben Island Shakespeare. One way is to wax poetic about the immortal bard and reaffirm the idolatrous belief in the transcendent universality of his writing. Doing so reduces the prisoners to yet more acolytes to the cult. Another is to see the prisoners themselves as subject of their time and place and circumstance, becoming active readers, interpretive agents to a text brought to them by unique circumstance. Van Katrovnam, Nair, Mbeki, Mandela. They all had to travel less of a distance to Robben Island than Shakespeare did. The Robben Island Shakespeare is an unsettling artifact. A fascinating one, to be sure, but the many historical forces that had to happen in order for it to exist have very unsettling implications. Forces as unsettling as the one that caused me, a man with a Swedish last name, to write this script on land traditionally maintained by the Sasapahaw, Saponi, Shakoni, Ino, and Cherokee nations, in a language first developed on the other side of the ocean. In English, the language of Shakespeare. A troubling pattern occurs when tracking the history of the performance of Shakespeare. Shakespeare went wherever the English language went, and wherever the English language went, empire went with it. Now would be the part where I could play a clip of some common cry of cur whining about how the woke left wokeists are trying to cancel Shakespeare, as a lot of dirtbags did this last March when the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, the charity that maintained Shakespeare's birthplace as a national memorial, vowed to decolonize their language around the playwright they've pledged to celebrate. And of course, Fox News was mad about it.
The process of decolonizing Shakespeare's work reportedly includes researching the continued impact of colonialism on world history and the ways in which Shakespeare's work has played a part in this. The effort, which roughly means distancing work from Western perspectives, reportedly began after concerns were raised that celebration of Shakespeare enables white supremacy.
Putting white supremacy in quotes is definitely a choice. Any English majors in the comments want to guess why they did that? Fox News continues.
Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust reportedly worked on a research project with the University of Birmingham's Dr. Helen Hopkins, included that praise of Shakespeare as a universal genius, quote, benefits the ideology of white European supremacy. Their research concluded further that colonial inculcation spread European ideas about art and used Shakespeare as a symbol of British cultural superiority and Anglo cultural supremacy.
Hey, let's replay that clip of the literal King of England being considered the final authority on how to recite Shakespeare.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
Fox News continues.
Celebrating Shakespeare's work, the research argued, was part of a white Anglo-centric, Eurocentric, and increasingly West-centric worldviews that continue to do harm in the world today.
Yes. Yes, it is. Of course it is. The right-wingosphere may wring their hands and shrug their shoulders at the idea that Shakespeare has been used to prop up white supremacy, but like, this may make me sound a little old, a little Gen X, but duh? We've all seen it happen in our lifetimes?
Well, I seriously regret switching parts with you halfway through and letting you play Murtaugh in blackface. I feel like it was in very poor taste in retrospect.
There's tons of good examples of old movies with... Frank, help me out.
Laurence Olivier in Othello.
Laurence Olivier in Othello, dude. That's like the classiest actor of all time.
Haply for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation that chamberers have.
What you just saw was a white man wearing makeup to pretend to be a black man saying that he does not have soft parts of conversation because he is black, which Laurence Olivier isn't.
What you seem and what you really are, and he works it out even further in the question of race in Othello.
Clavin has a video claiming that Shakespeare understands race better than the Democrats, which I won't comment on for everyone's mental health. But considering that Clavin reads Shakespeare as a source of moral instruction and ignores the performative aspects, how much can we trust his understanding of the division between being and seeming with a play that has, for centuries, starred white actors playing the lead in blackface? The subject of race in Othello is complicated, Yes, there are many references to blackness as disgusting, evil, worthy of expulsion from society, but also, the plot is about racism. About a man driven mad by the lies his white colleagues spread about him until he commits a monstrous act. Othello is a role that has been played with grace and empathy by black actors in the past, but like all things, it's complex. The role that race plays in the works of William Shakespeare is complex, because the role that race plays in all aspects of life is complex. Last year, Oxford University Press released a hefty 700-page book entitled The Oxford Handbook of Shakespeare and Race, detailing how complex it is. Beyond Shakespeare, race and racism are complex topics that deserve study on their own, but the idea that they deserve study is offensive to the right. Look at this sentence from The Vanishing Shakespeare.
And at the University of Virginia, students can avoid reading Othello in favor of studying critical race theory, which explores why race continues to have vital significance in politics, economics, education, culture, arts, and everyday realities.
Think about that logically. Be perfectly logical about the meaning of that sentence and restate it in the inverse to reveal their desired goal. Students can avoid exploring why race continues to have vital significance in politics, economics, education, culture, arts, and everyday social realities in favor of reading Othello. As if Othello was the final word on race as a concept. And as if there weren't aspects of racism in Shakespeare's other plays. Consider Aaron the Moor in Titus Andronicus, an unapologetically evil character whose evilness is tied to his blackness. In one scene, a character kills a fly, and Titus scolds him for it.
Alas, my lord, I have but killed a fly.
But how if that fly had a father and mother? How would they hang their slender gilded wings and buzz lamenting doings in the air?
But then...
Pardon me, sir. It was a black, ill-favoured fly, like to the Empress Moor. Therefore I killed him.
Oh. 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 Pardon me for apprehending thee, for thou hast done a charitable deed. Give me thy knife, I will insult on him, flattering myself as if it were the Moor, come hither purposely to poison me. This for thyself, and that's for Tamara!
It's a pattern. Blackness is something to be scorned in Shakespeare, even in the masterpieces. After killing Polonius, Hamlet turns on his mother, shows her a picture of Claudius, and says,
"Here is your husband, like a mildewed ear blasting his wholesome brother. Have you eyes, huh? Could you on this fair mountain leave to feed and batten on this moor?"
No one really talks about that moment in Hamlet because that's one of the scenes that's often cut. Still, the line is there. Hamlet calls Claudius a Moor as an insult. Hamlet says Moor with a hard R. There are so many moments in Shakespeare that frame whiteness as a universal good and blackness as an undesirable bane. In a scene from A Midsummer Night's Dream, Demetrius, who through magic fairy dust has fallen madly in love with Helena, praises her beauty like this. "Oh, Helena, goddess, nymph, perfect, divine, to what, my love, shall I compare thine eye? Crystal is muddy. Oh, how ripe and show thy lips, those kissing cherries tempting grow, that pure congealed white, high Taurus snow, fanned with the eastern wind, turns to a crow when thou holdst up thy hand. Oh, let me kiss this princess of pure white, this seal of bliss. Oh, Helena, you are so white, which is beautiful because it's white. You are so white, you whitey white, 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 thou honky queen of Crackertania." I directed a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. I had completely forgotten that passage. And when we got to that point in the initial read-through, I shuddered, having cast a black actress as Helena. By the way, Regina, if you're watching this, I'm really, really sorry. Anyway, we cut that whole sequence. No big deal. Because lines getting cut from Shakespeare plays is very common practice. Brana left that one moment in Hamlet because he wanted to adapt the entire play, including the commonly cut bits. Often, people will notice when you leave certain lines in. Or at least they should notice. Just listen. Really listen to this line that was left unaltered in one of the most popular Shakespeare adaptations of the last half-century.
"Go thither, and with unattainted eye compare her face to some that I shall show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow."
Benvolio is using the simile that beautiful people are like swans and ugly people are like crows. Swans have white feathers, and crows have... You get the idea, moving on. But even beyond bird metaphors, in Much Ado About Nothing, Claudio is set up for an arranged marriage, secretly to the woman he was already set to marry before she was slandered by the play's villain, and Leonardo asks him if he's ready.
Are you yet determined today to marry with my brother's daughter?
This is his answer.
I'll hold my mind were she an Ethiop.
Translation: I would go through with this arranged marriage, even if I had to marry a black woman. This line is often cut. It doesn't appear in the Kenneth Branagh version, for example.
Are you yet determined today to marry with my brother's daughter?
When I did Much Ado with Sarah's group, we changed it to this.
Are you yet determined today to marry my brother's daughter?
I'll hold my mind. Were she a healthcare CEO?
Formerly respected writer-director Joss Whedon kept that line in and turned it into a joke, where we are supposed to laugh at Claudio's insensitivity by strategically placing a nameless black extra who catches a stray racist remark. I'll point out that Whedon kept this line while deliberately changing another line.
If I do not take pity of her, I am a villain. If I do not love her, I am a fool.
This is the original line.
If I do not take pity of her, I'm a villain. If I do not love her, I'm a Jew.
Wait, what? No, this was supposed to be the fun video. No, wait, no.
Perhaps YouTube's best writer on the subject of anti-Semitism is Lady Knight the Brave, and her writing on Shakespeare and his anti-Semitism is essential viewing.
According to the ardent Shakespeare, the definition for Jew as an epithet means ungenerous person, from the Elizabethan caricature of Jews as rapacious usurers, void of Christian charity, and a person of no faith from a Christian perspective. The epithet, or a variant of it, appears in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Henry IV Part 1, Love's Labour's Lost, Macbeth, Richard II, and twice in Two Gentlemen of Verona. I had naively assumed all the anti-Semitism was contained in Merchant of Venice, but it isn't.
The Merchant of Venice alone has done irreparable damage. The character Shylock isn't just an anti-Semitic stereotype, perhaps he is the anti-Semitic stereotype. While I was writing this, the sitting president of the United States said this.
No death tax, no estate tax, no going to the banks and borrowing from, in some cases, a fine banker, and in some cases, Shylocks and bad people.
Shylocks. The man will shut down protests against the genocide in Gaza in the name of anti-Semitism, and he says Shylocks. Everyone quotes Shakespeare, and his quote just had to be Shylocks. Shakespeare was undoubtedly anti-Semitic. So honestly, the comparison to Kanye West might be accurate. Harold Bloom was a bardolater, perhaps the bardolater of the contemporary era, and even he could acknowledge how much harm Shakespeare's anti-Semitism has caused. Writing of The Merchant of Venice, it would have been better for the last 4 centuries of the Jewish people had Shakespeare never written this play. So shadowed and equivocal is The Merchant of Venice, though, that I cannot be certain that there is any way to perform it now and recover Shakespeare's own art of representing Shylock. Bloom, a Jewish man, could acknowledge the harm that The Merchant of Venice caused, but as a man, he couldn't acknowledge the harm that The Taming of the Shrew would cause.
Husband, let's follow to see the end of this ado.
First kiss me, Kate, and we will.
What, here in the midst of the street?
What art thou, ashamed of me?
No, sir, God forbid. But ashamed to kiss.
Why then, let's home again. Come, sir, let's away.
Nay! I would give thee a kiss.
Bloom writes of this scene, one would have to be tone-deaf or ideologically crazed not to hear in this a subtly exquisite music of marriage at its happiest. Yeah, a guy pressuring the spouse he spent an entire honeymoon abusing into a public display of affection is marriage at his happiest.
Where are my slippers?
Yes, I'm aware that I just pivoted from anti-Semitism to sexism, but my point is, these power dynamics are intersectional, and a person can acknowledge one power dynamic while ignoring another. See, this is why an education in gender, race, ethnicity, disability, or sexuality studies, and imperial transnational or post-colonial studies, and critical theory would actually be helpful. It would stop you from saying shit like this. Oh my God. I should not write giant chunks of paragraphs for me to say.
When we discuss the classics that are so often revisited and reimagined, we usually mean books by white authors. Now, this isn't a call to cancel Shakespeare or stop teaching his beautiful words, but it's a call to expand on Shakespeare, to expand on the literary canon.
Again, essential viewing. But calling attention to the harmful politics in Shakespeare's plays is the exact thing that draws the ire of those culture warriors who would elevate Shakespeare not in spite of, but even because of these harmful politics. This tension between the quality of Shakespeare's works and the political project that has used Shakespeare has existed for centuries.
What did British colonization do? It absolutely cut a whole people from the roots of their culture.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
And it did it in very, very, very cunning, very brilliant ways. And one of the offerings of that was the great work of Shakespeare. So if you think that it was, people love Shakespeare and I love Shakespeare, that's only partially the truth. The truth is you hate it also.
This is Arjun Raina, a master of Kathakali, the complex and elaborate dance theater with ancient roots that developed its modern form in Kerala in the south of India during the 16th century, the same time Shakespeare was born. Here, for a documentary produced by the BBC, Raina performs his version of Othello. Indian artists have, as the world has, made Shakespeare their own, in spite of oppressive forces that would try to make them more like Shakespeare. Thomas Babington Macaulay might call this art intrinsically inferior. Dennis Prager would probably call this narcissism. I call it a struggle to love Shakespeare. The great James Baldwin wrote this on Shakespeare.
Every writer in the English language, I should imagine, has at some point hated Shakespeare, has turned away from that monstrous achievement with a kind of sick envy.
This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle.
In my most anti-English days, I condemned him as a chauvinist.
This blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England.
This England, indeed. And because I felt it so bitterly anomalous that a black man should be forced to deal with the English language at all, should be forced to assault the English language in order to be able to speak, I condemned him as one of the authors and architects of my oppression.
Baldwin isn't alone. Bloom whined about a school of resentment, and in doing so, brushed off billions of people around the world with more than enough reason to resent the English language and the empires that spread it. From Africa to America to India, the Anglophonic world has a lot to resent. Baldwin's essay is entitled Why I Stopped Hating Shakespeare, and it's about the long process of seeing the quality of the work through the political realities one lives in. It took a scene from Julius Caesar for Baldwin to see the human beneath the poet, where a poet named Cinna is stabbed in the street for having the same name as one of Caesar's assassins.
Truly, my name is Cinna.
Tear to pieces is a conspirator!
I'm Cinna the poet! I'm Cinna the poet!
Terribly bad verses! Terribly bad verses!
I am Cinna the poet. I am Cinna the poet. I am not Cinna the conspirator. That cry rings in my ears, and the mob's response, tear him for his bad verses! And yet, though one howled with Cinna and felt his terrible rise at the death of his countrymen, to death it was impossible to hate the mob, or, worse than impossible, useless. For here we were, at once howling and being torn to pieces, the only receptacles of evil and the only receptacles of nobility to be found in all the universe. But the play does not even suggest that we have the perception to know evil from good, or that such a distinction can ever be clear. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones.
The tension between loving a work of art and understanding the harm the work of art has caused is universal and worthy of respect. Imprisoned in apartheid South Africa, Billy Nair loved the moment in The Tempest when Caliban stood up to Prospero and reminded his enslaver that the island was his by right of birth. The Tempest was partially inspired by an account of a wreck on the quote-unquote discovery of Bermuda, and the text explicitly codes Caliban as an indigenous person, while also bestializing him as being part fish. His enslaver, Prospero, calls him a misshapen knave and a demi-devil. The character Trinculo, a villainous drunkard, stumbles upon Caliban's sleeping body and says aloud how much money he could make displaying his corpse as a curiosity. Content warning: Russell Brand.
Strange fish. Were I in England now, as once I was, and had but this fish painted, not a holiday fall there but would give a piece of silver. There would this monster make a man, Any strange beast there makes a man where they will not give a penny to relieve a lame beggar, they will lay out 10 to see a dead Indian.
England was making its first forays into colonialism, and Caliban was Shakespeare's imagining of the inhabitants of this brave new world. The Tempest is also where the phrase Brave New World comes from.
Brave new world that has such people in it.
Reading The Tempest in Robben Island Prison, Billionaire might have also appreciated the part where Caliban says to Prospero,
"You taught me language, and my profit on is I know how to curse the Red Plague. Rage you for learning me your language."
The colonized man using the language of the colonizer to curse their acts of colonization. But of course, Caliban remains the antagonist of the story, and Prospero gets everything he wants, including Caliban's obedience. Caliban's last act in the play is to be sent off stage to clean Prospero's chambers to earn a pardon for his rebellion. His ending is in servitude as punishment. If we were to leave this ending unquestioned, if we ignore the history this story mirrors, if we were to focus on the brilliance of the author, we give implicit consent to the actions of the audience. The Tempest was first performed in 1611. Jamestown was founded 4 years prior. 5 years later, Pocahontas was captured and exploited to make men's fortunes, just as Trinculo imagined he could do with Caliban. In 1619, a mere 8 years after the premiere of The Tempest, the first enslaved Africans were brought to Jamestown. In the years since, how many millions of English-speaking men went out across the globe seeing themselves as all-powerful magical Prosperos in a world of misshapen knaves and demi-devils that they saw as Calibans? The idea that Shakespeare, alone among writers, spoke universal human truths forces an ignorance in his readers to all the ways that he is not universal. The basic line from these culture warriors is that supposedly Shakespeare couldn't uphold whiteness, or heteronormativity, or patriarchy. He upholds the universal truth of humanity. Of course, to a racist, white is normal. It is default. It is universal. Everyone else is just another race. The sociologists call it racialization. The creation of a stereotypical other built of arbitrary signifiers whose only underlying similarity is that they are not like the normal group, not like the non-racialized group. Just like how heteronormativity is just normal, while everything outside of it is queer. Just like how patriarchy is normal to a patriarch. And through these assumptions that we have, that Shakespeare wrote of universal truths, it follows then that these truths cannot be imposed, cannot be enforced, cannot be used to subjugate. They can only be gifted. Gifted to those who lack the culture. The very specific culture that grew out of one little country in Europe on the verge of conquering the world.
We'll rue this day, you wait and see. What is to be or not to be?
It doesn't matter what horrors young Pocahontas went through, because at least she got to breathe the same air as Shakespeare, says the co-founder of PragerU. When the Fox News and PragerU types cry woke gone mad when critics claim that Shakespeare has been used to promote white supremacy, they cry while doing exactly that, while using Shakespeare to promote white supremacy.
What the left always tries to do is pivot and then say that parents don't want children being taught the truth about American history.
Well, this line, "we don't want the truth told," is a projection. As I have said all of my life, truth is not a left-wing value. So for the left to start all of a sudden speaking about truth is like illiterates talking to you about Shakespeare.
Prager made that statement in a Newsmax segment while complaining about universities that teach critical race theory, an academic field which examines the social constructs of race and ethnicity and the ways that they are upheld through law and word and deed.
We internally believe that white is supreme, and it requires a constant process of ridding ourselves of this colonized mentality.
We're making a mistake by calling all of this CRT, because the left then says, oh, we don't teach CRT. No, they just teach pure, undiluted racism. Truth is not a left-wing value. For the left to start all of a sudden speaking about truth is like illiterates talking to you about Shakespeare.
Dennis Prager is invoking the name of Shakespeare to uphold white supremacy. Let me emphasize that the issues I'm touching on are complicated and important. Examining the harm that works of art reinforce is important. Understanding the complex ways that racism, along with anti-Semitism, sexism, the subtle politics of gender identity and sexuality, and the history of imperial and colonial violence, how all forms of politics shape our lives, is important. And they are bigger than Shakespeare. These are all massive topics that permeate all human interaction and are worthy of study and discussion and respect, and they are bigger than Shakespeare. Shakespeare is merely one man read by an audience of billions. Billions of political animals. Humans are political animals, after all. Politics are the myriad ways that we exist in relation to one another. Shakespeare is simply the author. The Pragers of the world dismiss all politics and instead demand fealty to the author, just like the authoritarians that they are. This is why it's important to decolonize the study of Shakespeare. Because Shakespeare, not the dead guy in Stratford, but the idea that is Shakespeare the bard, Shakespeare the inventor of the human, Shakespeare the greatest author, is an authoritarian idea. A colonial idea, an imperial idea. It is the idea that demands submission to the authority of the author. Us mere readers be damned. The proof is in their protestations. They don't whine when 1,000 small A authors are pulled from shelves. They only whine when the capital A author isn't at the center, because how dare the woke left not give authority to the author? William Shakespeare, the Glover's son who died a little over 400 years ago, had little to do with this, of course. The dude is dead. The people propping up his corpse, however, need him to be immortal, to distract from the countless millions of anonymous non-Shakespeares that the empires of Britain and America after them would ensure were very, very mortal. All those non-Shakespeares who may be black, or queer, or feminine, or even all three.
The English department at the University of Pennsylvania replaced the portrait of the greatest English language writer who ever lived, William Shakespeare, with a picture of a black lesbian poet.
Notice how William Shakespeare gets a full name, but a black lesbian poet doesn't. I shouldn't have to explain this, but this statement is racist, sexist, and homophobic. Like, the sentence structure itself is racist, sexist, and homophobic. Like, the sentence is a joke, and a black lesbian poet is the punchline. The implication being that the picture of Shakespeare being replaced by someone who is black and queer and femme is absurd, based solely on the subject's blackness, queerness, and femininity. If that wasn't the case, Dennis Prager wouldn't have said, a black lesbian poet. He would have said her damn name. Audre Lorde. The name that Dennis Prager did not say was Audre Lorde. The portrait that was placed in Fisher Bennett Hall, the University of Pennsylvania, in December 2016 was of New York-born poet Audre Lorde, whose name Dennis Prager did not say. Because if he said her name, people would actually be able to look her up.
Why? Because he was a white European male.
And before the unwiped assholes in my comments parrot Prager's claim that Shakespeare's picture was removed because he was a dead white male poet, no. Shakespeare's picture was removed because removing one picture of Shakespeare from one hallway does absolutely nothing to diminish his place in the greater culture. He is quoted by everyone. He has thousands of IMDb credits. The International Radio Telephony Spelling Alphabet, developed by NATO, which standardizes communication across global radio channels, gives code words for 26 letters and 10 numbers, allowing for easy cross-channel communication. The code words for the letters J and R are Juliet and Romeo. Characters from Shakespeare's plays have their names given to goddamn moons. Shakespeare can handle not being in the center of attention in one hallway. Shakespeare is not just a dead white male poet, true, but he's also not the only poet. The way the Pragers of the world talk about him, one would think that poetry belonged to one man, and theater as a medium died in 1616 when Shakespeare died, and that all writing that isn't his is worthless. And that central cult of personality around Shakespeare must be decolonized. In fact, it might be good for students of English literature to read a play that was written in the last 100 years. Because if they did, they might realize that today's villains don't usually sound like Richard III.
At the moment, the overwhelming majority of people out there feel that, well, that people get along better. take more of a common interest in the life of the community when they share a common background.
Today, they often sound like Carl Lindner from the great 1959 American play, A Raisin in the Sun.
Now, wait. Believe me, I want you to believe me when I tell you that race prejudice simply doesn't enter into it. Wait, now, it's a matter of the people of Clybourne Park believing, now rightly or wrongly, as I say, that for the happiness of all concerned, well, that our Negro families are happier when they live in their own communities.
To answer two questions that you undoubtedly have, yes, this actor is indeed John Fiedler, who for decades was the voice of Piglet in Disney's many versions of Winnie the Pooh. And more importantly, yes, this white man is telling Sidney Poitier that racism has absolutely nothing to do with his goal of ensuring that a black family will not move into a predominantly white neighborhood. There are definitely people who will lie that boldly, enforcing policies that hurt racialized people for not being white enough while speaking the sentence that race doesn't matter. The same people who will insist there is no racism in America while mocking the very idea of celebrating black artistry. The same people who will insist that Shakespeare hasn't been used to support racist ideals while using him to support racist ideals. But of course it would be ridiculous to assume this play was relevant to anything because it was written by Lorraine Hansberry, a black lesbian poet. God, I hope my sarcasm is coming through. The truly heinous lie behind Prager's fearmongering with their literary great replacement is the idea that teaching anyone alongside Shakespeare means not teaching Shakespeare at all, which is decidedly untrue. Consider the reading given by this author, an author championed by James Baldwin, who, himself, once resented, then loved Shakespeare.
You need to know. You need to have all of it. You need to be conversant with Shakespeare. You need it. At one point, when I was about 11, I guess, I was convinced that Shakespeare was a black girl in the South who had been molested. Else, how could he know what I knew when, in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone bemoan my outcast state and trouble a deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like the one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed. I'm desiring this man's art and that man's scope, and with what I most enjoy, contented least. When in these thoughts myself almost despising, happily I think on thee, and then my state is like to the lark. At break of day arising from sullen earth, I sing hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that I would scorn to change my state with kings. I knew that was my grandmother he was talking about. That sweet love remembered. And that's how I felt about her.
Maya Angelou was moved by Shakespeare. Would teaching the poetry of Angelou mean not teaching the poetry of Shakespeare? Of course not. It just means that we teach the truth. And the truth is, we live in a world where everyone is capable of understanding beauty and capable of creating beauty. And to those people who think that culture begins and ends with a dead actor named Will, remember that there are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in your philosophy. And you can write them down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You can trod them in the very dirt, but still, like dust, they'll rise. That was a Shakespeare quote, followed by a Maya Angelou quote. Angelou's autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, has often found itself on lists of banned books. In April of this past year, it was removed from the U.S. Naval Academy's library as part of the Trump administration's anti-DEI campaign. This, unlike PragerU's whine about a lack of mandatory Shakespeare courses in universities, is an actual instance of denying people access to great works of art. Maya Angelou, it must be noted, is not considered an author by PragerU's resident Shakespeare expert.
You know, Maya Angelou, terrible poet, but one of the poets who's always overpraised because she's black, right? And she had this wonderful line where she said, Shakespeare must be a black girl. She read Shakespeare and she said, Shakespeare must be a black girl. Why did she say that? Because Shakespeare spoke to her. She said, the poetry you read
I really hate that
for
man.
you. Black, white, Hispanic, man, woman, gay, straight. It has been written for you, and that is the whole point. The present knows nothing about itself. We know nothing about ourselves in the present, but the past knows a lot because it's already gone, because art is communing with another soul. And if you can't hear the artist because some idiot theorist is telling you about feminism and queers and race and gender in a way that the artist wasn't talking about it, if you don't let the artist speak, you aren't going to hear anything.
Notice how the voice of the artist and the past doesn't include Maya Angelou, whom he calls a terrible poet. Angelou died in 2014. Surely she's in the past, right? Does her voice get to be considered the voice of the artist?
It's leftists have taken over our education department, so these kids are ignorant.
He also babbles about how people supposedly whine about how the writers of India were indoctrinated with British writing and how their millennia of literary traditions were overwritten with Dickens.
One of the tragedies of the British Empire is that all those writers read all the British books. Terrible tragedy. Guess what? The British wrote better than anyone. They were better at writing. Their books are better. Their language is better. Their insights are better. I've read all the Europeans. I've read a lot of people from other places. The British in the period in the 18th and 19th century wrote better than anyone had ever written before. Oh, I'm a racist.
Yes, he is. Clavin is easily parroting the same Western chauvinism espoused by Babington Macaulay when he declared European writing inherently superior to any non-European writing. And in Clavin, in PragerU, again we see the cult of the West, the cult of the great man, again demanding authority for the author, with a clear demarcation of who is and is not worthy of authorship, and therefore authority. Shakespeare is. Angelou clearly isn't. This is the message that the Clavins and the Knowles and the MacDonalds and the Pragers and all the imperialists of the world want to send. Listen to these voices. Not these voices. Enlighten yourself, but only with the light that we will not snuff out. That light is artificial. And the culture warriors determine what light is shown and what light is extinguished. The quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has direct bearing upon the product which we live, and upon the changes which we hope to bring about through those lives. It is within this light that we form those ideas by which we pursue our magic and make it realized. This is poetry as illumination, for it is through poetry that we give name to those ideas which are, until the poem, nameless and formless, about to be birthed, but already felt. That distillation of experience from which true poetry springs births thought, as dream births concept, as feeling births idea, as knowledge births, precedes, understanding. And I didn't say that. That is from an essay entitled Poetry is Not a Luxury, and it's all about the need for poetry in the lives of women who deeply feel feelings that the language of the greater culture does not express. It is a call for the necessity of poetry as a living art, which helps us understand the meaning of being alive in our time. And it was written by Audre Lorde, the black lesbian poet. If you pay attention, you can understand a lot about a society that keeps some birds caged and releases others into the wild. Like this bird, to which we finally return. The starling. Sturnus vulgaris, the European starling, is a very common bird. With its glossy black plumage seasonally speckled white, flocks of starlings are regular sights in its native range of Eurasia. It also has a gifted voice, able to mimic the calls of other birds. Shakespeare wrote about this gift of mimicry in Henry IV Part 1, where the character Hotspur imagines training a starling to torment his enemies.
He said he would not ransom Mortimer, forbade my tongue to speak of Mortimer. But I will find him when he lies asleep, and in his ear I'll holler, Mortimer! Nay, I'll have a starling shall be taught to speak nothing but Mortimer, and give it him to keep his anger still in motion.
It has been said that this passage from Shakespeare nearly destroyed an ecosystem. The story goes like this. A man named Eugene Schieffelin was a member of the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, as well as the New York Zoological Society, and above all, a bardolater. His fandom of Shakespeare was common in his native New York City. Shakespeare plays were popular on Broadway, and Central Park was the site of a bronze statue of the bard. But Schieffelin wanted a living memorial. He was also a member of the American Acclimatization Society, a group dedicated to introducing European flora and fauna to the Americas. The group introduced blackbirds, chaffinches, and sparrows to America. The Romantic poet William Cullen Bryant composed an ode to this movement in 1869, writing, "We hear the note of a stranger bird, that ne'er till now in our land was heard. A winged settler has taken his place, with Teutons and men of Celtic race. He has followed their path to our hemisphere. The old world sparrow at last is here." Schieffelin had a goal, the introduction of every bird mentioned in the works of William Shakespeare, including the starling. In 1890, Schieffelin set a small population of starlings free to roost in Central Park. Within a century, the starling population exploded, making their homes across the continent as far west as California, as far south as Sonora, Mexico, and as far north as Alaska and Quebec. From an initial population of less than 100, starlings at their peak would number 200 million. The starling would prove an invader, not only devouring crops of fruit planted by humans, but also by laying eggs in the nests of native birds, crowding out hundreds of species indigenous to the continent to spread more of itself. The starling would learn to mimic species their ancestors never knew: the killdeer, the American robin, the eastern wood pewee, and the red-tailed hawk. All while crowding out these same birds to their habitat, the uncaged birds would sing other bird songs. The starling would become as much a blight on the ecosystem of the Americas as its featherless European counterparts were. In 2000, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature listed the world's 100 most invasive species. The starling earned its spot on that list.
Does the lark song distract you from your God, John?
Of course not. It is evidence of God.
Ah, well then, perhaps for some, I was the lark.
Here's the thought that haunts me. Shakespeare may have been the lark. Was he also not the starling? But there's more to the starling. The story about Eugene Schieffelin is itself more myth than fact. He did indeed release starlings into Central Park, but the birds had been present in North America for decades before his stunt in 1890, and there's no evidence that Schieffelin introduced them because of Shakespeare. The first printed mention of Schieffelin's supposed Shakespeareism didn't happen until 1948, in an article by Edwin Wade Teal, whose own note suggested that it was speculation. And according to Jason Biddle's 2022 New York Times article, The Shakespearean Tall Tale That Shaped How We See Starlings, their invasive nature has been overstated. Their presence is multifaceted and complex, and while they may eat grains of farmers, they also eat pests. They are omnivorous, and their presence can do as much good as harm. The starling, like all things, is complex, and we must honor complexity. We must understand the space it occupies, realize the harm it can do. But still, it's a pretty bird. Perhaps Shakespeare is a starling. Ubiquitous, yes. Invasive, perhaps. Beautiful, absolutely. But just a bird, whose song can be heard in the wild among the songs of many other birds. What a dull, hollow world we live in, if the starling was the only bird singing. In the essay Why I Stopped Hating Shakespeare, James Baldwin ends with this.
The greatest poet in the English language found his poetry where poetry is found, in the lives of the people. He could have done this only through love, by knowing, which is not the same as understanding, that whatever was happening to anyone was happening to him. It is said that his time was easier than ours, but I doubt it. No time can be easy if one is living through it. I think it's simply that he walked his streets and saw them, and tried not to lie about what he saw. His public streets and his private streets, which are so mysteriously and inexorably connected. But he trusted that connection. And though I, and many of us, have bitterly bewailed, and will again, the lot of an American writer, to be part of a people who have ears to hear and hear not, who have eyes to see and see not. I am sure that Shakespeare did the same, only he saw as I think we must. That the people who produce the poet are not responsible to him. He is responsible to them.
The reason I stopped talking about Shakespeare is because I was afraid I'd become the kind of person who could only talk about Shakespeare. The kind of person who treated Shakespeare as a synonym for good. The kind of person who wanted art and beauty and truth and humanity to start and end with this one guy, 400 years dead. Those kinds of people, the Dennis Pragers of the world, want a culture that is also 400 years dead, where nothing can be beautiful unless it's exhumed from the corpse of a working-class actor who never lived to see his name justify empires. I instead prefer a world where beautiful art is created constantly by the living, not in austere reverence of the past, but in dialogue with it, where everyone can tell beautiful truths and make beautiful art in a living, breathing, eternally new culture. I stopped talking about Shakespeare because too many people want to only talk about Shakespeare. And I stopped talking about Shakespeare because I don't want these corpse fucking fash clowns to think I'm on their side for even a fucking second. Fuck PragerU. Death to fascism. And I'm done. The rest is silence.